Good to be with you, my friends. We'll get the slideshow started here and work. So now that we've buried old Abraham, last week we had the courtship of Rebekah and Isaac. Abraham got his servant to get Isaac a wife, if you remember. Then the servant traveled and found the wife, negotiated with the family, and then Isaac welcomed Rebekah into his home, right? So there we go. Now we've got Isaac and Rebekah, the next generation.
Call that a courtship?
Well, whatever it was.
Whatever it was, yeah.
The deal, the bargaining, the dealing. No, not much of a courtship, to say the least. So now we start into 25. Now Abraham had taken another wife. Her name was Keturah, and she bore him Zimran and Yokshan, Medan and Midian, Yishbak and Shua. Yokshan begot Sheva and Dedan, and Dedan's sons were the Asherites, the Letushites, and the Lemuites. Midian's sons were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Avida, and Eldah. All these were Keturah's sons, but Avraham gave all over that was his to Yitzhak. And to the sons of the concubines that Avraham had, Avraham gave gifts, and he sent them away from Yitzhak his son while he was still alive, eastward to the east land. Now these are the days and years of the life of Avraham, which he lived, 100 years and 70 years and 5 years, and then he expired. Avraham died at a good ripe age, old and satisfied in days, and was gathered to his kinspeople. Yitzhak and Yishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Makhpela, in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar, the Hittite, that faces Mamre, the field that Abraham had acquired from the sons of Het. There were buried Avraham and Sarah, his wife. All right. So the story of Abraham ends almost as abruptly as it began, right? Almost out of the blue. He takes another wife, has a second family, has some concubines, has other children by them, but ultimately gives all to Isaac. Now, what we can say is Isaac is born when he is 99 or 100, which means Isaac is 75 when he buries him. Roughly 40 years after Mount Moriah, maybe more, maybe less. That's not exactly dated, but it's a while later. And it's a lot older than we tend to think of. It also, as we'll learn in a few minutes, if Isaac is 40, when he has his sons, when he has when he has Jacob and Esau, well then Abraham's around for the story, but not the way we tell the story, right? So it's a weird, it's a weird sort of storytelling process. Abraham totally met and saw Jacob and Esau, but not the way the story is told in Genesis, right? Or again, as we've talked about from before, that alienation that happened between Abraham and Isaac continued, and Abraham never really saw his grandchildren, but it's hard to say. It is beautiful that Isaac and Ishmael bury their father together without drama, without recriminations, without conflict, or between the two of them, or with this other family that is suddenly floating around in the picture. They all just sort of seem to get along and do the work they need to do. Both are present, neither speak. But there we go. That's, again, this is where it's just sort of this fascinating ending. We have one of the most important and central figures in the text who gets, like, I don't know, what was it, 10 verses, and then bye. Not a whole lot of epitaph to old Abraham. Any other thoughts about Abraham before we jump into Isaac's family here?
I just wish there was more of a story about Isaac and Ishmael together.
Yes, I agree. I wish there was a lot more to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish there was more story, not just about this, but just about their lives together, period. Like growing up together, how they treated each other. Did they love each other? Did they sort of just suffer each other? I don't know.
Well, and it's interesting that he left everything to Isaac. Was that because Sarah was the favorite wife?
Pretty much, yeah.
because he took another wife and had more children, and then he had concubines and probably had children with them.
Isaac is the firstborn. Very important back then.
Yep, he is the firstborn of his first marriage. So
Okay. Of Sarah.
Of Sarah.
Abraham's born. Ishmael is Abraham's firstborn. But okay.
He is.
But he's not married to, it's just the handmaid, right? It's the concubine, effectively, that Ishmael it comes from. So with Hagar, but yeah.
So he wasn't actually married to her. She was a concubine, in other words, right?
She was a concubine. Well, she was Sarah's servant. So we don't even, servant, it could be slave, could it be, there's lots of questions there that we just don't know the answer, what exactly that relationship was.
Right.
Other than if we take the rest of the stories of the patriarchs and including Moses on down through the line, this was a very common practice in that world, that the men would have sex with the wives and the servants and anybody they wanted to in the family system, just about, it seemed like, because they all talk about having 2 children by this maid servant and 4 from this second wife and whatever else, and you just sort of go, okay, that's they say it without any sort of condemnation, so it seemed to be an okay practice on some level for them.
Oh my gosh. Well, so did he take this second wife after Sarah died?
Yes, Sarah has died, and he took her. Well, at least maybe. I don't know. The way the story is told, yes, it's after Sarah dies that he marries a second wife. But like I said, with the rest of the story, Isaac was, about 40 years old when he has his children, and Abraham's around to see him, but there never is a point of connection there, right? So it's not clear if that is a fact or if it's just a narrative choice, right? Where they say, well, he had a second wife, he had kids by her and other concubines, but Sarah was the one that mattered, so we don't really care.
Yeah, you never hear any more about her. This is it. This piece right here is where you hear about a second wife, and boof, that's it.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Hope that went well for you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh. Not a real good system for at least it was for the person like Abraham, but not too good for those other people.
No. It worked out great for Isaac, but everybody else got the short end of the stick.
Right. You think were they did anyone care for them in any way, to share resources with them? It seemed like he was very, very wealthy, and he could easily have shared with a lot of people, with these other descendants too.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's over and done with. But it's just a question to me. It seems like, and did he care for those people?
Maybe.
Bill, does Ishmael stay involved in the story as we proceed on?
You'll see the next, I think, 8 verses are the last time we hear from Ishmael.
Okay.
So the interesting thing, Roy, though, is, certainly in our text, this is the last that we hear of Ishmael. But we know that the Ishmaelites, the son of Ishmael, or the tribe of Ishmael, show up in the story of Joseph, right? Like they buy him as a slave,
right,
from the Israelites or from the children of Israel. And you see lots of other sort of references to the people of Ishmael in the text, but not the person himself. He disappears.
Okay.
And of course, if you were to read the Quran, Abraham does not forsake Ishmael the way it's laid out in the Bible. He still visits Ishmael and is involved in Ishmael's life in their text.
So that's,
Yeah, in their tradition, Abraham's still around and still involved.
Okay.
It's not purely that moment of just sort of sending them out. the way they do.
Well,
The
and
way
the
it
fact
shows
there
in the
had to
text.
be some connection with the fact that the two of them bury Abraham together. I mean, you know, if they'd never seen each other again or had no connection, that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. You wouldn't think.
Mhm.
All right, so we'll go ahead then and just, that's a good enough transition to the next, which is more lineage, quite frankly. Now, it was after Abraham's death that God blessed Yitzhak, his son, and Yitzhak settled by the well of the living one who sees me. Now, these are the begettings of Ishmael, son of Abraham, whom Hagar, the Egyptian woman, Sarah's maid, bore to Abraham. Whew. All right, here we go, some names. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names after the order of their begettings. Ishmael's firstborn, Nebaioth, and Kedar, Adbeel,
Wow.
Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa,
Good grief.
Hadad, and Tima, Yitur, Naphish, and Kedma.
Oh my goodness.
Say that 3 times fast. These are the sons of Ishmael. These, their names and their villages and their corrals, 12 leaders for their tribes. And these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 100 years and 30 years and 7 years. Then he expired. He died and was gathered to his kinspeople. Now they dwelt from Havilah to Shur, which faces Egypt, back to where you come toward Assyria. In the presence of all his brothers did his inheritance fall. So, Roy, this is the end of that story of Ishmael. We don't hear more about him. We sort of just hear that he has 12 tribes, princes, sons, depending on which way you translate all of that in his community, like Jacob, like Israel, but their story is not going to be told here, right? You have this sort of almost very tempting, if you know how it goes and that Jacob's going to have 12 sons that become the 12 tribes of Israel, you're like, wait, Ishmael did too? What? Okay, I want to know more about that. But it just sort of is this, hangs out there, right? But what we can see, and it's not stated here, is God's promise that nations will rise from Abraham already proves true, right? Already there are princes and sons and lots and lots and lots of kids that are coming all over the place, right? Between Abraham's concubines and second wife, but even through those children, not necessarily the promise, that's Isaac, but Ishmael, God proves true to his promise that Ishmael too will be a nation. So it plays through. Yeah.
Do any of these folks ever have daughters?
I was good.
I'm just saying,
Good
Bill.
question.
That's
Good
all.
question.
You know they did. They just didn't count them.
You never hear about them, though, do you?
Nope, they got to do something pretty special or pretty ornery or both to get
Or
mentioned.
maybe they were just dogs.
Sheldon, stop that.
No, it's tough.
Bill, is there
Right.
significance to
Sons,
the
no
number
daughters.
12?
I'm just wondering how they continue to procreate, but that's okay.
That's that started back with Adam and Eve, right? They only had 3 sons, but managed to populate the earth with 3 boys.
Managed to populate exactly right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, Roy, what were you saying?
Is there significance to the number 12? Both had
Yes.
12 tribes.
Yes, there is. I mean, it's clearly a symbolic kind of number, but I'm not sure that it's ever really stated. Sort of, I mean, 40 is another number. 4 can be another number. There are these numbers that are clearly important, but it's never explained why they're important. You know, why 12 versus 4 versus 7 versus 40.
Mhm.
You just sort of have these numbers that repeat and you go, okay, clearly 12 is an important number and it's a group of 3 sets of 4, right? Maybe that's it. Who knows?
Cheaper than a dozen.
Yeah, but it's definitely an idea or a number that has a sacred resonance.
Okay.
And Jesus certainly chooses 12 disciples to mirror the 12 tribes of Israel. I mean, there's no doubt that was a choice Jesus makes.
Right. Okay.
But we don't get that sort of answer of like 12 means this.
Hmm.
You'll hear lots of theories, but I don't know that I've ever heard one that's really a definitive answer to that. So again, Ishmael is also the only person outside the lineage who's given an age at death, 137, right? Much less really traces the lineage. And so there's definitely this sort of tacit respect shown to the other son of promise, right? That here is Ishmael, who God says, makes the promise to Hagar that he too will be a child of promise and have a nation. And so there's this, again, there's a certain honor accorded to him. It's not a huge honor, but it's an honor that no one else is given in the text. And the funny thing is, when we visited Israel, everyone, they called each other cousin all the time, right? Our Christian tour guides would say, oh, that's my cousin over there. Not remotely related, but they all have a deep understanding, sort of basically through the Bible and the text, as well as just the reality it's a small place in a small corner of the world. They all felt like they were related on some level in one way or another, which even if it's an unwanted relationship, it's still the reality that, yes, the Jews are our cousins, and so are the Muslims, and so are the Christians, right? Like this whole group is overlapping and interrelated in lots of different ways. It was just an interesting sort of, whenever I hear now them talk in the Bible about, oh, well, this group became the Hittites, and this group became the Ishmaelites, and they're technically a separate nation, but they all, again, the whole story is basically, yeah, but they're all related. They all have the same 2 or 3 dads.
Okay.
So it's a fascinating worldview that they'd still at least preserve in a good portion of Israel about everyone's sort of, oh, that's my cousin over there. He's a good guy.
But they say that about people who are Muslims and others too, not just other Jewish people.
Yeah.
I mean,
our tour guides were Episcopalians, were Anglicans, Christians, as they would say. They were, hold on, I have to get this correct. They're Arab Palestinian Christian Anglicans.
Oh my goodness.
Right? That they have they're in all of those different groups. But they would talk about their Jewish cousin over here, and they would talk about their Muslim cousin over here, and they've got their and there's lots of other faiths over in that region as well, that they would talk about them as cousins and good folks as well, that they just work with lots of different people, and they would all, that's my cousin, that's another cousin, and that's just how it all works.
Yeah. And we don't refer to someone as a cousin unless we do have a direct path of connection.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It is. Anything else for Ishmael before we sort of move on to the story of Isaac and Jacob and Esau? All right, we'll jump straight into the next then. Sorry, now these are the beginnings of Yitzhak, son of Avraham. Avraham begot Yitzhak, and Yitzhak was 40 years old when he took Rivkah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean, from the country of Aram, sister of Laban, or Laban the Aramean, for himself as a wife. And Yitzhak entreated the Lord on behalf of his wife, for she was barren. And the Lord granted his entreaty. And Rivkah, his wife, became pregnant. But the children almost crushed one another inside her. So she said, if this be so, why do I exist? And she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your body, 2 tribes from your belly shall be divided. Tribe shall be mightier than tribe. Elder shall be servant to younger. When her days were fulfilled for bearing, here, twins were in her body. The first one came out ruddy like a hairy mantle all over, so they called this one Esau, rough one. After that, his brother came out, his hand grasping Esau's heel, so they called his name Yaakov, heel holder. And Yitzhak was 60 years old when she bore them. The lads grew up, and Esau became a man who knew the hunt, a man of the field, but Yaakov was a plain man, staying among the tents. Yitzhak grew to love Esau, for he brought hunted game for his mouth, but Rivkah loved Yaakov. All right, So this is just from a purely a storytelling process. It is the strangestly stored. This is one of the weirdest stories in the Bible, mainly because it's all about Isaac and his children, and yet Isaac is completely passive. He is completely almost not there, right? I mean, he doesn't speak, even when he's praying for Rebecca's pregnancy, right? He's praying that he might have a son. It's very reminiscent, and we're supposed to, I think, hear the echoes of Isaac being like Abraham and Sarah, like, oh, Sarah can't have a child, we're old, it's not going to work. He prays, Rebecca, the prayer is answered, but Isaac never actually says a prayer, and Isaac never actually gets a response. He just sort of says the prayer, and then she gets pregnant. Oh, well, okay, well, there's God's response, I guess. It worked out. But it's all this very, very passive kind of process. Even his choice to favor Esau is handled in the third person, right? Like, well, and he likes Esau, and Rebecca likes Jacob. But there's not a moment where Isaac says, I greatly preferred Esau because he brought me good food or something, nothing like that. Or a story about him that says this is why he liked Esau, or they got along better. They were similar. He was also redheaded. I don't know. There's nothing. There's nothing about it. And so you're just in this weird spot of, wait, what happened? What's going on with Isaac here? That he's so quiet, he's so passive. And even Rebecca takes it, right? God doesn't even answer Isaac directly, right? He does. Rebecca gets a verbal response. She's like, why are these, I'm having a hard time with this pregnancy. The kids are wrestling in my stomach. But he gives her a response, but not Isaac. And Rebecca gets that response, that prophecy that the elder will serve the younger. There'll be two great nations inside you. The elder will serve the younger. Now, this is a Bill Murray question. This is not any of the commentaries, but the question could come, is that why Rebecca prefers Jacob? Did God once again create division like he did with Cain and Abel, right? Like God arbitrarily chose to like Abel's gift more than Cain. So Cain was crestfallen and then ended up killing Abel. How much of this is God's prophecy, and how much of it does God create the problem by getting involved in humanity's life and situation, right? Like he goes, well, the younger one, totally, like Stefan said earlier, totally against the rules of primogeniture and the rules of that era, a scandalous situation. The younger one will be the one who's in charge. That's not how it's supposed to work, right? It's supposed to be the oldest son's in charge. Even if it's twins and by 3 minutes, it's still the older is supposed to be the one who gets the double share. But here God's reversing everything and causing all kinds of trouble. Short term, long term, and in between term. I'll pause there. Thoughts there before we Brueggemann has his response to some of this. No, yeah, what do you do with it? It's just God inserts himself and we go, okay, God. So Brueggemann says, the narrator wants us to know there is a dark power at work in the life of Jacob. He is born to a kind of restlessness so that he must always insist, grasp, and exploit. His life is a trouble not only for himself, but for those around him. Interesting quote. I don't hear dark power in it. I can agree with the second half that he's born to a kind of restlessness and he's always insisting, grasping, exploiting, and that his life ends up being a trouble for himself and those around him a lot of times. But I don't know about the dark power. And Brueggemann may not mean dark and demonic or evil, but just sort of some other powers at work. But an interesting quote from Brueggemann about Jacob. So we have to take a minute and just look at the name Jacob, Yaakov. And there is the Hebrew letters, which is Yaakov, which is related to Yakeb or heel, right? Oh, and also it's Yakab, or he supplants, he deceives. Okay. Now, if you look at the letters, Yakab, Yakib, Yaakov, you can sort of hear it, but here's the thing. In Hebrew, if you were to read the names in a Torah scroll, they don't have any of those little dots above or below the letters. Those are the vowels they added later. Hebrew only has consonants. They added the vowels later, according to the tradition. Like, oh, it's Yakib or Yakab or Yakob, right? The vowels are through tradition, not through the actual text. So if you read the Torah, then all three of those words are literally exactly the same three letters. It's just that the vowels are different, right? Or what they call, and this is a big deal in Hebrew, the triliteral or the three-letter root is the same, AQB, as it would appear the same in the unpointed or a scroll. And it's called pointing. That's what they did when they added the vowels. So all that to say is, they're very similar, Yakob, Yakib, and Yakab. And it's one of those, is he the heel grasper, as the text declares? Or is he the heel? Or is he the one who supplants or deceives? Right? It's all sort of, and this is a very common thing in Hebrew. And actually, New and Old Testament, names matter a lot because they tell us all kinds of stuff. Terence Freetham rejects the supplanter deceiver connection. He says that's less likely. He thinks it's more, since the text says literally that he was one grasping the heel, that then we should take it at face value. And he is the one who grasps the heel. And so it's more of a connection there than to that deceiver supplanter model, mainly because he thinks it's a bad look for Jacob. Brueggemann, another scholar, says either of these readings of his name adds the foreshadowing of a life of conflict beginning even at birth. So those are two responses. Here's the Murray response, which I'll start with Pache, Brueggemann, and Freetham. It is before birth they're fighting, not at birth, literally before birth that they're fighting with each other, or Jacob is fighting with others. And scripture gives everyone names that are deeply deterministic of their story, right? Here's some examples. Jacob is both the heel grabber and a supplanter deceiver. We'll see that in the stories as we go along, that he's constantly wheeling and dealing and trying to get the upper hand on somebody. Jesus is Yeshua, or God saves. So should we be surprised then that his life is about God saving God's people? No, we should not be. We should hear it the second he's given the name Yeshua, right? Or Moses is his name, it means to draw out. And people think, oh, well, that's all about him being drawn out of the water, right? He's drawn out of the Nile. But clearly it's also predictive of his drawing out Israel out of Egypt, right? He's drawing out Israel from Egypt. He draws out his people from slavery. All of these are named, and we could go through lots of them. Pretty much every story in the Old and New Testament that we have, when they give us a name, if we look at what the name means, almost always it ends up being something that you're like, oh, yep. Or Joseph, right? Joseph means God provides. So guess what? He takes his family from a place of famine, and God provides for them food in Egypt and a place to be safe for the next 400 years. Again, we shouldn't be surprised that these things happen. All right, so with all that in mind, thoughts about Yaakov, the supplanter, the deceiver, the heel grabber?
Bill, is it possible that heel could also have a meaning as it does in English? Because a heel in English can also mean somebody who's not very nice. Okay, if you're a heel, you could be a deceiver, right? Or so there you go. So I'm just thinking, if Hebrew also has that double meaning as it does in English.
I don't know, but probably. I mean, there's certainly a great deal about in the Middle East still to this day about you don't show people the bottom of your feet, right? Like one of the things we were instructed is you don't cross your legs in Israel because that shows someone the bottom of your feet, and that's a sign of disrespect to show someone your heel, right? In that same way, the famous thing that happened, you know, when they tore down all the statues of Saddam Hussein, they took their shoes off and slapped them with the shoes because that's a sign of disrespect to walk on someone, or to throw a shoe like they did at President Bush when he was there. It's all these shoes, and walking on your feet are these signs of disrespect. So I would imagine culturally it's very similar. That idea of a heel as being someone not good, not respectful. I don't know if it has the exact same connotations, but it's clearly similar, at least according to the modern connections, right? And even Jesus, when he washes feet, he says, you know, one will turn his heel on me. And it's, you know, he's talking about being betrayed, and it's a very similar connotation there in the first century. So it certainly would seem likely that that it's not a good thing to be called a heel at any era. My other favorite ridiculous one is in the story of Ruth. They talk about Naomi and then her sons, Chilon and Mahlon. Sorry, Mom, it's Malin. It's Uncle Malin. It's the same name, right? Chilion and Malin. I had an Uncle Malin.
Uncle had that name.
Yep. And the whole story starts, you know, like, oh, Naomi is in Moab, which an Israelite's not supposed to be in Moab, but she has two sons, Chilion and Mahlon, right, who have wives, Orpah and Ruth. And the very next sentence is then they die. Well, here's the thing. Mahlon means diseased and Chilon means dying. So her sons' names were diseased and dying. So big surprise, they died.
Oh no. I'm sure my grandmother did not know that when she gave her son that
I'm
name.
sure she did not. She just knew it was a biblical name.
She was very religious and she knew that came from the Bible, but she didn't admit that.
It was. But these are again, this is the stuff that in the Hebrew, they do these names all the time to make it clear, like, oh, Jacob, he's going to be trouble, right? I mean, I don't, with all respect to both of those guys that are sort of like, I don't know which it could be. And I'm like, oh, I don't doubt for a split second what it is, which is here's the heel grabber, here's the supplanter, deceiver, because as we know from the story of Jacob, newsflash, that's what he does his entire life. He's constantly trying to get the upper hand on all kinds of people, and doing all kinds of things that are less than honest, or certainly using the situation to his advantage, right? To be as generous as we can to Jacob. He is always, and he literally wrestles with God, right? I mean, this is not a guy who's going to lay down easy. So for me, it's super easy to say, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure the storyteller meant it on all those levels, meant it to be a pun and be something that is predictive of who Jacob will be. And then the other, so I think Mahlon is married to Orpah and Chilion to Ruth, or at least it's connotated that way. Oprah is named after Orpah. Her mom wrote the name down and reversed the letters, like might have been dyslexic or something in her when they were writing her name down for the birth certificate. She became Oprah instead of Orpah. But that is the connection.
Oh, really, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating things with the Bible. Yes.
What did you say Chilion meant? Or Chilon?
Chilon and Mahlon are diseased and dying.
Diseased and dying.
Yeah. Not names to give your children.
Oh, gosh.
I wouldn't highly recommend it.
No.
I wonder if that's where chill out came from.
Oh, no.
I don't think so, but maybe, you never know.
Put chili on your hot dog or chili off your hot dog.
Yeah.
Ooh.
All right, so we'll continue now with the first story of Jacob and Esau. So once Yaakov was boiling boiled stew when Esau came in from the field, and he was weary. And Esau said to Yaakov, "Pray give me a gulp of that red stuff, that red stuff, for I am so weary." Therefore they called his name Edom, red one. And Yaakov said, "Sell me your firstborn right here and right now." And Esau said, "Here, I am on my way to dying. What good to me is a firstborn right?"
Oh my God.
And Yaakov said, "Swear to me here and now." And he swore to him and sold his firstborn right to Yaakov. And Yaakov gave Esau bread and boiled lentils, and he ate and drank and arose and went off. Thus did Esau despise the firstborn right. And again, the least surprising moment in the Bible, Yaakov immediately tricks his brother to supplant him, right? Like, if you heard the name as one who supplants and one who deceives and one who takes advantage of the situation, or a heel grabber, what's the first story about him? He supplants his brother, the very first story, right? God predicted it. Jacob's name is based on it. Why would anyone be surprised that this is what's happened, right? People will be like, "This is an amazing story," and I'm like, not really. It seems to be right up the line of who Jacob is, what he's named for, and what God told you he would be, right? Like, how many more situations do God told you that's who it was going to be? That's his name that his parents gave him.
Well,
Probably going to be that way,
Esau was pretty easily manipulated. That was ridiculous.
Yes, Esau is not particularly portrayed as very intelligent either.
Not too right.
He must have been really hungry, Bill.
Really hungry.
The funny thing, this is the funny thing, is I love how people trying to make the text into something it's not, talk about how, oh, this word might mean this, which means that Esau was truly close to death. He'd been out in the woods for days and was truly close to dying. And you're like, oh, that's not what the story says. It's not in there. Even if it is in there, it's very subtle and it's hardly there at all. The bigger thing is that Jacob gets the other hand, not that Esau was actually hungry. I think it's supposed to look pretty silly and absurdist, and quite frankly. Again, Pache, and so if you don't know, Pache is one of those things when you disagree between biblical scholars, they'll say Pache Friedman or Pache Brueggemann. Peace, which is just what it means, right? It's peace in Latin. Peace, Friedman, but I completely disagree with you. That's how it usually goes. Peace, my fellow biblical critics, but this one, this is who Jacob is. This is who he is. He's the deceiver, the supplanter, the trickster, right? Mm-hmm. Brueggemann has a little bit more realistic response to him. They note that Esau is the ultimate example of immediate gratification versus deferred gratification, right? Give it to me now. What do I care about the stupid firstborn right down the road? I'm hungry. I need lunch. And cannot get past whatever he needs in the immediate. Sometimes in the book of Hebrews, in the New Testament, they will declare that Esau is proof of someone who lacks faith because he can't wait for what is the better thing. I don't know that that's in the text either, but that's what the letter writer for Hebrews claims, is that Jacob is an example of faith and Esau is a lack of faith because he can't wait for the food.
What?
Yeah.
Jacob is an example of faith? Okay, got it. All right. I hope that's not faith. That's all, Bill, but go ahead.
I agree completely. I'm just telling you what the story is.
Whoa. Okay.
And then Brueggemann, which I love this note that Brueggemann makes, he notes that we are not told if Jacob is hungry. Which I'd never considered, but it's true, right? We don't even, Jacob might have been hungry too, but he's like, oh wait, but I can get the upper hand here, right? Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, but we aren't told.
He was cooking, so he must have been hungry.
He wouldn't have been cooking if he wasn't, right? You don't go in there and start cooking if you don't need it. But it is an interesting note, right? That Jacob probably was at least partially hungry. It's just Esau who's sort of all over the place and all id. And then he uses the situation to gain the upper hand, that is, Jacob does. which is a continuation of that battle that started in utero, right? Like they were wrestling in their mom's stomach to such a degree that she cried out in pain. Hey, guess what? Now they continue to battle as whatever age they are, young adults, children, not altogether clear. And I don't know that I've seen anything that really declares how old they are in this moment. You get the idea that they're older, but they could have been younger. And this was in an era, of course, when there was no such thing as kids or get to be kids. It's no, you got to get to work if you're going to make it. So they could have been 8 or 10, right? When this happened, as easily as I tend to think of it more as teenagers, but who knows? Brueggemann and others, oh wait, that's the same thing. Somehow copied the same one. Sorry about that. Then Paul uses this story later on in the book of Romans to wrestle with what God is doing between Christians and Jews. If you remember from our Romans conversation, Paul's very distressed. Why are these pagans coming in to become Christians and the Jews aren't listening? What does that mean for who Christians are and who Jews are? And then in that chapter 9 of Romans, Paul argues effectively that Christians are the younger brother, that they're Jacob, forcing Israel into the role of Esau, right? That God has doing a new thing with the younger brother, and thus sort of pushing out Esau, and we're taking that privileged status away from Israel. He doesn't say that all the way, he just makes the comparison. And then he quotes from Exodus to note the strange turn of events, that he's not really sure what's going on. Paul isn't sure what's going on with the Christians and Jews. He uses this story specifically and then says, God, he quotes from Exodus 33:19, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. And we're quite frankly just stuck with it, right? We're stuck with Paul's argument, and we're stuck with the situation of the story of Jacob and Esau. God chooses to love some folks more, and we just have to deal with it. The same way he did with Cain and Abel, he does with Jacob and Esau here, and he does with, quite frankly, Abraham and the rest of the world, right? Why?
Are we blaming this on God?
No, I don't think we're not blaming it on God. It's just to say that God makes some of these choices and is part of it. Not that God is not separate from it, right? But I don't know that God is to blame for it. No.
Yeah, I don't know. God made the choice. Okay, I mean, Jacob and Esau made the choices. Okay, I don't know
Sure.
that God made.
Well, no, God, yeah, Jacob and Esau made all the choices here for who gets the birthright. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. I didn't see God playing a role in this. I just don't. Okay, but there you go.
Yeah. Brueggemann goes on to say that the justification for why this is all happening is hidden in the purposes of God, right? Like, why did Esau so easily give up his right as the firstborn? And why was Jacob able to do it? And why is it all sort of laid out this way? And we're just sort of stuck with, because that's how it goes. I don't know.
Innocent behavior.
Yeah, well, and that's sort of to Stefan's point as well. I certainly believe God is involved in the story, but this is where I also have a hard time with going, well, God also there's free will, right, in the situation. God lets them choose their choices and works through us, but also sometimes in spite of us, depending on which way things we're choosing. It's not controlled. Brueggemann goes on to say, neither in our text, the section that we just read, nor in the Pauline argument are things resolved. It's just, this is what happened, right? Paul can't really say exactly why the Jews don't come to Jesus and realize that he is the Messiah, nor can the text, the author, really say this is why Jacob gets the birthright over on Esau in what is, quite frankly, a ludicrous story if you really get down to the nitty-gritty of it, right? It's just a silly, almost caricature-like story of silliness and stupidity by Esau and cleverness by Jacob that you just go, what? What do we do with this? nothing's resolved other than, well, now Jacob, I guess, has the birthright. There are some studies, though, just to be clear, that from the Near East, that they say there's lots of other stories about how the firstborn can give up their birthright. This is a possibility. It's not something that was invented just for the text, but they found lots of ancient stories and narratives from the same region that all talk about how there are some of these folks who will give up their birthright and go serve the king, give up their birthright and go be a priest at the temple, those kinds of things. So it's not an impossible thing to do. It seems to be a semi-common practice, or at least an accepted practice in the ancient Near East. So here's the one thing we have to name, though. Paul's argument has a problem, and that is Islam can make a similar argument against Christians, or the Latter-day Saints can make it about the rest of the church. If anybody who comes in younger is favored, well, there's always going to be someone new on the block that can say, well, now God prefers me to whoever was before me, right? If you take Paul's argument in there that God made that choice. Then to believe, I agree with Stefan that I think this was the two guys working out their issues, not necessarily God declaring Jacob blessed or holy or preferred, right? But it's definitely the problem with Paul's argument. It also leads to supersessionism, which is, at least the Episcopal Church understands that as a heresy. Supersessionism is the belief that Christianity replaces Judaism and the promises that God makes to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob, and that we are then the new chosen people and the Jews are not. Supersessionism is one that, again, Episcopalians don't believe, but there are parts of the church that still believe it. That the Jews have no place because they rejected Jesus and they rejected, in that process, rejected God, right?
I don't think Jews have gotten the word on that yet.
Good one.
I don't think they believe that.
No, nor should they. Nor should they, right?
No.
But I do think Brueggemann is right. This is how he ends his reflection on the story. This text does not do more than invite the listening. And this is a quote from him, this whole part. This text does not do more than invite the listening community to wait with Jacob. Right? It's clearly not the end of the story, but this is where the story starts for Jacob. Like, he's got his brother's birthright. Now what? What happens next, right? And that's all we got. Thoughts, comments on Jacob, on birthrights, burying Abraham, you name it. What do we got? Anything?
Bill, a couple of years ago, at an adult forum, had to do it by Zoom because it was during the pandemic.
Yeah.
We did a book called Son of Laughter.
Yes, great book.
By Brueggemann, and that was a really interesting book. I had never heard the term midrash until that time.
Yeah.
But apparently it is sort of a different interpretation of a story, of a Bible story, I guess you would say. Anyway, it's a very interesting book. Fun.
It's a great book.
Yeah.
I really like Brueggemann. He is such a skilled writer. He did another one called On the Road with the Archangel that is about, he retells the story of Tobit, which is it's in the Apocrypha. Not a lot of folks know it, but it's basically the story, and this is partly why I love his retelling of it, but he basically distills it to a man and his dog go look for a wife, which is the story.
Right.
It is the story. It's basically this man and his dog go to a foreign land and they find a wife, and there's all these sort of adventures they have together. It's a good story. Next week we'll do chapter 26, which is Jacob steals the blessing, right? He's got the birthright, then he steals that blessing from Isaac, which is the only time Isaac speaks. And then he flees from the righteous anger of his brother. So we'll look at that next time. Where Jacob continues to be a great guy.
I'm not saying what Jacob did was good. Seems to me like that kind of system would make people always feeling, you know, like I'm a few minutes younger or whatever, and how come I get nothing and he gets everything? And, you know, like now, unless our children have done something terrible that we want to disinherit them, we generally think that we divide equally between our children. Or at least most everybody I know feels that way, and not like the firstborn. Sorry, Bill, but the firstborn gets everything.
I thought I got a double share.
Yeah, the double share.
This is news to me. What? I thought I got
Corinne will not be happy.
Your sister may not approve of that.
Yeah, your sister won't be happy. But you know, it seems like that whole system would just cause angst among a lot of people. I mean,
Well, I don't know if y'all saw this, but if you want proof of that, look no further than the book that's going to be published on January 10th by Harry, who they announced the title of the book. Did you hear the title of the book? The Spare.
The Spare. Oh,
Oh, no.
Right,
well,
because that's what they call him. They always say like there's the heir and there's the spare, and so he was the spare, and
yeah.
literally you don't have to read too hard between the lines. I'm sure that book is going to be full of feeling second best all the time in that family, right?
Well, we don't have to feel too badly though about those royal people, because they still have a pretty good life. They still got a castle and if they choose, he even got $5 million as a going away present when they left the royal family.
Yeah.
Wow. But anyway,
But
I'm
it's
sure
still there, right? It's
I'm
still that,
sure-
I mean, that envy and that conflict that's created by the first gets everything and the second gets
Right.
nothing, right?
and in that royal thing, feeling like the firstborn, yeah, it is the one that will be in that power.
Yeah,
Folks, I've got to go. Enjoy
interesting.
being with everyone.
Good to see you, Roy.
Bye.
What was that, Stefan?
I was going to say, I'm also interested that we're talking about Jacob and all this. And when nobody's so far, we haven't mentioned the role Rebecca's playing.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we can do
Rebecca
that next
plays
time.
a very big role in this story. Okay, so yeah.
She was encouraging. She wanted him because he was her favorite.
Yep.
Exactly.
She
Well,
was
and you have to wonder how much that prophecy that God gave her was also the impetus for her to do it, right? Don't worry, God's got your back. You're supposed to do this.
God told me
He's
this a long
supposed
time
to.
ago.
He's supposed to be number one. Okay, so yeah, exactly right. Okay,
Yeah.
So,
And also, if there's anything beautiful about all these stories, is it shows humanity. Okay, it just, we're playing with human beings here now, and I just find it when we start throwing God in the middle of it all, it gets confusing.
Well, I do think, yeah, I agree, but
Yeah.
it's also, for me, this is some of the most important theology we can do, because it is also, well, how was God present in their life is also trying to answer the question, how is God present in mine, right?
I understand that, okay, but
But yeah, how much has God predicted or demanded?
we
Yeah.
try to impugn meaning sometimes it's not there, okay, as a result of that. All right, you know, as an example, did God make Esau give up his birthright? I don't think so. Okay,
No.
I just don't think so. I just don't believe it. So, but
yeah, it's like we have free will, and you know.
did God make Jacob a heel?
Yeah.
No matter how you want to define it, right? So
Right.
no. I'm just saying. That's
Yeah.
all.
Interesting.
And I just think we need to be real careful here. Okay. Yes, is God playing a role? Yes, but it's hard to define that role. I think we know what that is. I think and I think when we start trying to figure it out, sometimes that can be a dangerous exercise. That's all.
Not
Agree.
yeah.
Sometimes, not always, but sometimes. Okay.
A lot of the time, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
All right, my friends, well, have a great day.
good to be together.
And
Good to be
you,
with you.
Good
you
luck
next
with
time.
the PT, Stefan.
thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Take a little pain thing before you go.
Okay, or maybe afterwards. If I take anything, I'll take it afterwards.
Oh, okay. Sometimes
So-
some of my friends, they told them to take something before they went to help them get through it. So whatever works for you.
Bye, y'all.
Take care, everyone. All right.
All right.
Bill, I'll see you Sunday. Okay. So anyway.